Welcome to In the News for July 21, 2023. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hey, Brett.
Good morning, Jeff. Bonus podcast today.
That's
bonus,
right.
Not our podcast, but you and I, my fair co-host friend, we were a guest on a friend of ours podcast called New Solo. Now, as most of our listeners know, both you and I, Jeff, work in the legal world. And so Adriana Linares is a host of a legal-focused podcast called New Solo for solo practitioners, solo lawyers. And she invited us on to talk about lawyers using Macs. Although I got to tell you, this podcast, I think it's over an hour long. We just went on and on. So much of the information can be applicable, I think, to almost any profession. But this is out today. We'll have a link in the show notes. It came out even after your post, Jeff, so you didn't even get a chance to link to it. But this is called the All Mac Edition, the episode for Mac Curious Attorneys.
Yeah, and despite the title, and obviously if you're an attorney trying to decide what to do with your computers, I think the episode has a lot of great information in it. But frankly, anyone, I mean, we did talk about some lawyer-specific in the sense professional, like assuming that you're using your stuff to get work done. And it's not just Macs, too. We talked about iPads and iPhone and the whole ecosystem. I'll tell you what, it was a really interesting discussion. Like, I really enjoyed it about, if you're trying to make some decisions, you want to upgrade your hardware, what should you get, what should you be looking for, and what are some of the best tools that you should use with your stuff. I thought it came out really well.
It was so fun. So fun. Okay, so we'll link to that, but thanks. Hey, if you can't get enough of me and Jeff this morning, we got another podcast for you. Now let's talk about something really, really technical and technology focused, Jeff. How about fonts?
Indeed.
Even more specifically, the fonts being used in Microsoft Word, or I guess it's Microsoft Office, right? But Microsoft Word, boy, have I got some thoughts on this, just because I know you and I have been using Microsoft Office software for so long. But apparently Microsoft is now going to change the default font that comes in Microsoft Word. And this was a nice post you linked to today.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft Word is obviously the 10,000-pound gorilla when it comes to writing things. Although, as you said, this is not just Word. This is also, other Microsoft apps, Excel and stuff like that. But and Microsoft does not change its default font very often. So when they do so, that they put a lot of time and effort into it. Right. When I think of fonts, I can't help but think back to the 1980s when I had switched from using previous computers to the Mac. And one of the big things about the Mac was that for the first time, it was a computer that actually offered you all these creative fonts. And of course, some of them were just, really crazy, like the old San Francisco font that sort of looked like a ransom note. But the idea that you could, use this bitmap printer and use different fonts just seemed, so revolutionary. And then especially if you had a laser printer. And over time, we've gone that I don't use the crazy fonts as much now as I used in the 80s. But fonts are definitely something that I think of, even though, as I pointed out in today's post, a lot of the times when I'm doing professional writing, I'm just using the most basic of fonts, Times New Roman, sometimes because courts require it and people sort of expect it. But I do think it's worth, taking at least a little time if you write to consider the fonts that you use and just think about the impact of that. And obviously Microsoft does so too, which is why they've come out with the new font. And, I actually think it looks like an interesting font. Aptos, I guess is how it's pronounced. It's a nice looking font.
Aptos, Apatos, I don't know. But so was Times New Roman the default font from Microsoft Word way back
from
in the
like
day,
the 19 in the 1980s? I don't know what their default was, but from like the early 90s, I graduated law school in 1994. Definitely around that point, in the mid 90s, all the way through the mid 2000s. That's what it was, and then it switched to Calibri, which a lot of people give Calibri grief. I mean, it's whatever a default is. So many people use it that it sort of gets a bad rap. I mean, it was a fine font. When Calibri came out in the 2000s, Microsoft was trying to come up with a font that would look good printed out, but would also look good on the computer screens at the time.
Right.
And you're never going to find one thing that pleases everybody. And it was a sans serif font, so it didn't have the little lines on it like Times New Roman did. But I actually think that there was something to it. It's not something that I tried not to use it, but I didn't really, mind it if it came up. But I do think that look at them side by side. I actually think the new Aptos font looks a little bit better. I thought it was the quote that I had today. What was it? The developer said that it was like, what did he say? He says it's like Helvetica with a bit of a human touch. And I think that's, describing fonts with words is obvious. Nice. It's like describing music with words. I mean, how do you do it? But I actually think that's not a bad. It's got a nice look to it. And so, I look forward to seeing the change.
I remember when they went to Calibri. This was, you say it so nicely. I say sans serif, but you're like sans serif. So I remember that they had Calibri. That was the sans serif font, but then they also had Cambria, right? Which did have the serifs on there. And so I remember that those were the two default fonts that you can get. And I know when people use the default fonts, because it's like, that's just what's there. It's what's available. I have always been one to eschew the default fonts if possible, but I don't want to eschew too much, right? I don't want to go too far flung askew, because like you, I'm usually typing Word documents in a professional setting. So obviously I don't want to use something that's like script hand, font or anything crazy. I remember a long time ago, I was doing a presentation for the Georgia State Bar, and one of the fonts that you can get by default in Microsoft Word is called Georgia. And like you said, many courts still today require Times New Roman just because of the size and the typeface, and they even have restrictions on, line spacing and everything else. But I remember that Georgia State Bar was the only bar that said, hey, when you're going to turn in materials to us, it has to be in Georgia font.
That's sort of funny, yeah.
I liked the Georgia font, and I continue to use that because it looks very similar to Times New Roman, but I would agree with a little bit of a human touch, right? I can tell when Times New Roman is being used. People can see that, and it's kind of boring on there. But
yeah, Georgia is the font.
Yeah.
Well, you go ahead, and then I'll go.
I would just say we're really nerding out on the fonts here, but just this gentleman here, that this article that you linked to, Steve Madison, who was also responsible, like you talked about Microsoft really paying attention to this, right? This gentleman was responsible for Windows 3.1 original true type fonts, including Times New Roman, Arial, and Courier New, as well as Segoe. I've never used that one, but I know. So anyway, he apparently is behind this new Aptos as well. So a lot of history even in this, but just really curious stuff.
Yeah, Arial is interesting because it sort of has a bad reputation for being Microsoft's attempt to copy Helvetica and yet not have to pay for the Helvetica licensing fee. So it's not quite as nice as Helvetica, but it's really close to it. I will tell you that the Georgia font, like you say, it's a similar to Times New Roman. Georgia is actually the font that I use for the text on iPhone JD. If you use just the default fonts that come up on the website, I think it looks pretty good.
And you're not even in Georgia, which is great.
And I'm not even in Georgia. I went to college at Emory in Atlanta, so I have a little connection there,
close enough.
I'll say one last thing, and maybe more of interest for just attorneys and people that are total of font nerds. But in Louisiana, where I do most of my law practice, in the state appellate court system, we have our appellate court and then the highest court, the state Supreme Court. In our appellate courts, we're required to use a 14-point font. And I personally think that Times New Roman in a 14-point font is very readable, and I like it a lot. But at our state Supreme Court, you need to use a 12-point font, which I actually find Times New Roman to look a little small in 12-point. And that's the reason that, even though, like you said, Cambria was one of the alternative Microsoft built-in fonts that Microsoft came out with about 15, 20 years ago, I think that for my eyes at 12-point, if you compare Times New Roman and Cambria, something about Cambria, just because it's a tiny bit more narrow, the way it's sort of spaced out, I think it just looks a little bit more pleasant to the eyes. And so it takes up a tiny bit more space. If I remember correctly, the same brief in Times New Roman will be a little shorter, and the same brief in Cambria is a tiny bit longer. But I just think it looks nice enough, and most people don't notice it. I realize that 90% of readers don't even notice this, but 10% will. And I actually think that a lot of people who would claim they don't notice it, I sort of think subconsciously, when you're just reading a brief that's well formatted and stuff like that, and that looks good on the page, I actually think that it could make a difference.
It makes a difference. It does.
And we could get into all sorts of other geeky formats, like, do you justify on the right side or do you not justify, and do you have one space between words or two spaces? There's all these sorts of things that people that really get nerdy on this talk about. But I think it matters enough to at least think about it. So I think about it.
Yeah. Well, I just, before we move on, we have to, of course, address, you've already alluded to the Apple fonts. I didn't even know this page existed until this article linked to it. This is fonts for Apple platforms, which it makes sense, because if you're designing an app, or some kind of an app for the Apple ecosystem, whether it's Mac OS or iPhone OS, it's good to make sure that you have, because I forget exactly when Apple changed to San Francisco. It must have been within the last couple of years or so.
Yeah, within the
Or at
past
least
decade
this
for
version
sure.
with this version of San Francisco, right? Because every once in a while they'll change it. But I didn't even know you can go to this page and you could download San Francisco Pro. They have compact, mono, and New York. And again, this is mostly for developers and stuff that are doing like human interface kind of work, that kind of a thing. But I like this, that I didn't even realize that you could go and download these fonts from Apple. But thank you, Apple, for even offering this. This would be good if you're interested in using the app, the iOS iPhone fonts, you could download it here from Apple, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And of course, those are built into all of the Apple devices, the San Francisco font. I think San Francisco is a beautiful font that Apple came up with, like you said, a number of years ago. It's what they use. I guess it started on the iPhone, but it's on the iPhone, the iPad, the Mac now. It's a very legible font. It's easy to read. I like it. And another sans serif font. I think it looks really great.
Call today. iPhones are standing by. You link to another article today, which I feel like we're just getting deeper and deeper into the new standby mode, which isn't available officially yet, at least not publicly, other than there's a public beta. So this is iOS 17. You and I have talked about the many additional features coming in iOS 17 and iPadOS 17. But this was a great article from MacStories, Federico and John Voorhees talking about their favorite features from the new standby feature, and additionally, which means I've already spent money today, the standby chargers that they recommend. What a great article here.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Brett, this is not the first article on standby mode, because it's one of the really beloved features of the upcoming iOS 17. But I think this is the best one so far, and I say that for two reasons. First, the first half of the article, which I believe John Voorhees wrote, does a great job of going through all the different modes that you can use. Whether you use the widget mode that has a different thing on the left and right side when you have your iPhone just sort of on a stand, or the time modes that show the big clock. And they talk about some of the limitations and stuff, but it's a great article for describing how the mode works, and I learned a lot more about the mode that I didn't know about. That's the first part. The second part of the article that says, okay, to really take advantage of this mode, you're going to want to have some sort of a stand that you attach your iPhone to using MagSafe to charge it. And what stand you're going to use, because there have been stands for years that would hold an iPhone using MagSafe, but oftentimes the iPhone would be in the vertical orientation, up and down, portrait orientation. But of course, to take advantage of standby mode, you need to be in the horizontal, in the landscape orientation. And so the question that we've mentioned before in the podcast is, like, I feel like I need to get a new stand. In fact, more than one new stand, because the stand that I'm going to use for my office, I might only want the iPhone on it, but the stand that I'm going to use at home on my nightstand, I'm going to want to charge multiple devices overnight. And so I feel like I have this brand new need for different types of stands for different circumstances. And so the second half of this article, and I was so happy to see this, they start to look at all the, well, not all the options, but many of the options out there, and discuss, what their favorites are. The one that I've talked about in this podcast, I think as recently as last week, was the Studio Neat stand that I've been looking at. And I don't even think that that's one that they considered, but they did talk about some other ones that looked really good. And I tell you what, I'm not ready to make a purchase yet, because I'm not running iOS 17 yet. But I'm going to continue to look very closely at articles like this for the next month or two, because, obviously there's never going to be one perfect stand. Different people have different preferences. But I love that more companies are going to be paying attention to this, coming out with stands. We're going to have tons of new options. And I look forward to reading more to decide, what stand I want to use at my office, what stand I want to use at home. And so it's just nice to have sort of a new category of accessory. It's not a new category, it's been there before, but it's being used in a new way. So it's really interesting to read about all the options. So you were saying that you actually purchased one, Brett, from this article?
Well, I am going to get the cube. So let me just
that's the one that he really likes.
Exactly. What Federico does on the first part of this article, as to your point, the thing that struck me quickly, Jeff, was wow, there's a lot of customizable options here, more than I would have expected from a new feature coming from the iPhone. Does that make sense?
And remember, Brett,
like,
these are just the built-in ones, because I think third parties like Widgetsmith will probably be able to add to this. So it's going to be a huge number of options. Yeah.
That's what struck me, because normally when we see a new feature from Apple, it's like, it's just, you know, the basics, right? And then it gets better over the next couple of years. But just the way that John was explaining this, I'm like, I can do that, and I can change that and the color on that. So I'm very impressed with that first part. And that's the main takeaway I had from that first part. And then the second part, otherwise known as how to spend more of Brett's money. Yeah, it's all of the different options here. And this first one that Federico liked a lot. First of all, to your point, you haven't gotten one yet, Jeff. And here's the thing. We're talking about the stands that are already available now. Before all of these product developers even knew that Apple was coming out with the standby mode. I can only imagine the flood of additional stands that are going to be coming out once we do have the public version of iOS 17. And I welcome that. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just recognizing like one of the reasons now, like we're trying to plug these older products that were designed in a certain way for, like you said, most of the time we just have it in portrait mode because that's how we look at our phones all the time. But no, we need a stand now that can flip maybe between portrait and standby. And frankly, the more I read about all these articles that you've shared, I'm going standby all the time. Like I cannot wait. And to your point as well, like I haven't upgraded into the public beta or to iOS 17, but you linked to another great article here from our friend Jason Snell that he's even saying, you know what? It's not as bad as it maybe used to be. In other words, we would used to tell people, don't worry about the public betas, right? Like let the other guinea pigs, you know, work out all the kinks and everything. But I thought Jason did a great job in this article of saying, you know what? You might be okay running it. And I liked even his point in there is that if you do run the public beta now, which again, it's public beta, not the developer beta, public beta. That's why I keep saying that. But that means it's, you know, it's kind of gone through already some ironing out of issues. But Jason says, this is your opportunity to tell Apple what you don't like about it now so that you don't have to deal with it for the next year. I don't know if that's even true necessarily, but I thought he had a good point in that too.
Yeah, so that, you know, he's if you're on the fence about whether to install the iOS 17 beta, I guess what Jason's saying is it's okay. It's okay to go ahead and do it.
Exactly.
I'm still not quite doing it. I'm not on the fence. I don't want
closer.
the, you know, I don't want my battery life to decrease, and I don't want to have the stability issues. But if I was going to do it, it might be to try this standby feature. One more thing I want to mention about standby before we move on to the next item on our agenda is that I did not know before realizing this article in MacStories that standby mode treats notifications in a special way. And he had some pictures in here that they're sort of, and you can turn it off. You don't have to have notifications come up on the standby screen. But if you decide to have it come on, it makes it sort of like, you know, big. It really takes advantage of the landscape screen that you can have the person's picture or, you know, whatever you use to represent their picture in there, and you can have the notification. And I can actually, so as I'm sitting here at my office and I'm just typing away on my computer, if I have my iPhone next to me in standby mode, you know, I can see it being useful that for certain notifications, like, you know, a text from, you know, my wife or my kids, just to have it, you know, bigger and right there that I can just sort of glance it and see it, as opposed to the current system where my watch will tap me and I see I have a notification, but I actually have to pick something up to look at it and see what the notification is. So I look forward to trying, you know, again, everything about standby mode, I'm really excited about for people that are just, you know, sitting at a desk or in a kitchen where you have something off to the side that you can glance at. I think that I think it's going to be great.
You know, we brushed on this just a little bit, but it occurs to me, because I agree with everything you're saying. I cannot wait for standby mode. And I see this as even being on my nightstand, like you've mentioned, and like even John mentioned in here. Currently on my nightstand, I have the MagSafe charger for the Apple Watch, because again, we've mentioned this a couple of times, but I don't think we've really delved into it too much, that I like my standby mode on my Apple Watch, which I think they call nightstand mode, right?
Nightstand mode, exactly. Yeah, very similar idea. Very similar. Yeah.
Which is I can just, you know, turn my head and glance over there, and in standby mode, the Apple Watch, it actually, the screen goes off unless you wave your hand or you tap it or get close to it, and then it just, you know, nicely and gently comes on, and it tells you the time. And if you got an alarm or something like that, it doesn't give you any kind of other information. But I love that nightstand mode, Jeff. Like, that's just been helpful for me to glance over and see the time. But now I feel like that idea is just multiplied 10 times over
Yeah.
with standby mode on the iPhone, to where, getting back to the actual physical stands now, normally what I do with that MagSafe charger is my Apple Watch is, standing up in vertical mode so that the screen is facing me, and my phone is lying down in horizontal mode, right? I don't see the screen of my phone because it's charging. But I almost want the opposite now. I want my iPhone now to be standing up and facing the screen, facing me at night. And then my Apple Watch, I really don't care. I just want it to be charging somewhere, right? And that's why I think I'm so interested in some of these stands at the bottom here, specifically this Anchor 3-in-1 cube that Federico likes so much, because it does exactly what I was just explaining. You can now have the iPhone standing up, the screen facing you, or it's kind of at a slight little tilt there. And then there's a little tiny, cute little shelf that pops out to the side that has an Apple Watch charger on it. So that's the one I think I'm going to get. But I got to tell you, I'm biting my lip, because it's like, do I want to do this now? Because if Anchor does it this well now, are they going to come out with a better version when iOS 17 comes out? Anyway, these are just, agreed, first world type of problems here. I understand, but it's like, man, this is just getting so exciting in what we could possibly do next.
And you raised a good point there, Brett, that I hadn't thought about until you just said it. I really like nightstand mode on my watch, but once I'm using standby mode on my phone, do I no longer need nightstand mode on my watch because it's going to be better? So maybe you're right. Maybe in the future, it's okay for my watch screen to be, flat, or, something that it's not directly looking at me. Gosh, I hadn't thought about that. It's really interesting. We'll have to, I can't wait to try it out and see how it all works.
I know.
Good point.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll link to these articles so you can read through, all of our folks can read through the different stands, and then let us know. I think you even invited folks, so let us know, like, if you're going to be using a stand or what you're kind of looking at. So that stands for the iPhone. What about stands or holders for the HomePod? I thought this was a nice article here. I know you have talked about, what did you call it here, Jeff? The Balalo real wood tripod for the HomePod. Here, let me bring.
I guess that's how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Yeah, Balalo. It looks really nice, though. I mean, it's really sophisticated looking here, and it sounds like those are the ones that you got for your HomePods. But this is a great little story from 512 Pixels on other stands that you might want to consider for your HomePod.
I bought my stand for my HomePod Mini because I wanted something functional. I had a specific need. It was behind my couch. I wanted to raise it a little bit, but I wanted to look at nice. Yeah, exactly. This is very simple. Didn't cost that much, $25, something like that. It holds up my HomePod Mini. It looks great. That's what I was looking for. Looks good and is functional. The article that you're talking about from Stephen Hackett, he sort of went to the other extreme. Things that, well, starting with one that might be useful, which is a little portable HomePod Mini charger. But he then gets into these crazy things that hold the HomePod Mini on its side, which is not how Apple.
It's like a big eyeball. It's like a big eyeball. It's like a big eyeball. It's Hal looking at you.
It looks a little bizarre, and I actually don't know if you get the best sound quality when you're doing it in this direction. But it's just funny that different manufacturers have come up with different ways of mounting and charging and everything else. The HomePod Mini, it's funny. It's funny.
And then even the little robot here that looks similar to your real wood. This looks like something out of like the Portal video game or something, right? Or maybe Star Wars, like the droids.
Exactly.
But that could be fun. So anyway, if you've got a HomePod and you are looking to get a nice stand for it, we'll link to that. You can either go simple like Jeff did, very elegant, or you could go a little crazy like
or you
Stephen
can go
Hackett.
Star Wars.
You can pick. Once you do have your HomePod, here's another little nifty gadget that you linked to today. This is called the Eve Flare, which is like it looks like a HomePod almost. It looks like it is a sphere that lights up, right? Now, I said HomePod, but this actually works with the HomeKit, which could work with your HomePod, I guess, if you set it up correctly, and it works on Matter. We've talked about the Eve company before, I believe, but this Eve Flare is a nice little white plastic sphere lamp, which you can change the colors and everything.
It's been out for a while now, but I've always been sort of intrigued by it. I mean, it's sort of a standalone orb, as it were. And the idea is that
Right.
you would sort of you charge it and it stays charged for, I think this review said that he went about 6 hours with it on a full battery charge. And like you might like go outside, for example, to your backyard, and maybe you're sitting around like a table out there. You could just put this orb out there, and it's not going to provide super bright light that you would use for, like, reading a book or something like that. But just in terms of some atmospheric light, whether you have it in the middle of the table or off to the side, or maybe you have two of them. And like most of these modern LED lights, it's infinitely configurable. So you can change the color using the iPhone app. It works with HomeKit, like you say, Brett, so you can turn it on and off using, your Apple Watch and everything else. And so, I mean, if you want to set just the right mood and have just the right color of light, whether you want something a little more orangey yellow, a little bit more blue, it looks like a sort of an interesting thing, about $100. Or I could see some kids' rooms. I mean, I know in my son's bedroom, he's got all sorts of lights all over the walls, LEDs, and stuff like that, that he can change the colors of it and make his room look whatever color he wants.
Right.
So
mine too.
it always struck me as sort of an interesting device, and this review seemed pretty positive of it. So yeah.
I was listening to another podcast the other day, and it was a travel podcast, and they were talking about going to Las Vegas. I don't know if you've heard about this.
I just saw this week. Yeah, this is crazy.
The Las Vegas Sphere. So when I saw the Eve Flare, I thought, well, I could maybe I could control a little light sphere on my desk, or it'd be really cool if I could control a light sphere in the middle of Las Vegas. This thing is humongous. Apparently it's covered in screens on the outside, Jeff. And then on the inside, there's got to be, there's some kind of entertainment complex. I think U2 is going to go and have a concert inside of it. But yeah, look, it has the whole screen on the outside. So you can go either on the inside or the outside. I mean, where else but Las Vegas? But I mean, I just heard that the other day, and I was thinking, wow, well, that would be interesting. I'd like to control the Las Vegas Sphere too. That'd be nice. Okay, let's talk about earphones. Now, we always talk about the AirPods, the AirPods. And I know we talked a few weeks ago where my daughter bought herself the AirPods Max, and I became very jealous of my daughter. But this article you linked to made a good, I think they came up with a good argument for maybe considering the Beats Studio Pro over the AirPods Max.
The Beats brand is interesting because Apple's owned them for years and years now, right? So, even though it doesn't have the AirPod name in it, they incorporate the same technology that AirPods have in terms of having a great connection to your phone and, the different modes that you have with AirPods. So you really get all of the same advantages of the AirPods Max, but because this is sort of one of the latest and greatest things, at least Chance Miller argues that it's got some, interesting design features and, some other little features you don't get with the AirPods Max. This type of over-the-ear headphone, although I'm really intrigued by it, I don't think that it's probably for me. It's a little bulky, but for some people and for some types of listening, this is obviously the best way to go. Of course, you're going to get the best noise cancellation. If you're on a plane, this is probably the best possible thing you could use. So I wanted to link to this article because if you're in the market for AirPods Max, it's at least worth, I always think of the AirPods Max as the AirPods that look like Beats headphones. And so now we've got the latest version of Beats headphones that maybe is sort of one step better than the AirPods Max. Maybe not, but at least it's worth considering the two of them. It's interesting.
Yeah, to be clear, we talk about the AirPods and the AirPods Pro, which are little earbuds, right? The AirPods Max, right, exactly, what both of us are aware of them. The AirPods Max are the over-the-ear headphones, and the Beats Studio Pro are over-the-ear as well. They look like what we would generally consider to be like regular headphones. And of course, the big name in this area for years and years has been the Bose sound, whatever, the noise canceling on there. I would just tell you from this article, as Chance makes out, and when I've heard people talk about this, is mainly because the Beats Studio Pro are very comparable, but they're $200 less than the AirPods Max. Really, that's the biggest argument that I see people making for that. I will also tell you, my daughter is my daughter, so she did a lot of research herself when she was looking for the AirPods Max, and she was very, very close to considering the Beats Studio Pro. But Jeff, it just came back down to the Apple ecosystem. Like, she went into the Apple store, she tried them on. I think she tried both of them on, and there's just something a little bit more polished, I guess, on the AirPods Max, which you would hopefully expect as much if you're paying $200 more. And she ended up going with the AirPods Max. It's just it's just that sleekness. It's just the way that it was compatible, and it works exactly the way that she wanted it to work. We've talked about this. It even has like that digital crown component on there, that you can click, for turning it off or switching between noise cancellation and everything. And the Beats Studio Pro, I thought Chance Miller did a great job in this article of making the argument on both sides, and it's good to read, like you said, Jeff, if you're in this market. Even my daughter was very sensitive on the price, but she ended up going with the AirPods Max just because those extra little touches that you're not going to get on the Beats.
Two features that he mentioned, for example, that you don't get on the Beats, you have to pay more money for the AirPods Max is, I guess, and I'm used to this with my AirPods, that if I take my AirPod out of my ear, it pauses the music automatically, right? And apparently the AirPods Max work the same way. You take them off, and it's nice enough to pause the music. So if somebody comes to talk to you and you take them off quickly, you don't have to worry about fumbling around to find the pause button. Then the other thing is that the AirPods have always done a great job, including the Max version, apparently, of switching devices between when you go between an iPhone and iPad and every different devices. And I don't think this Beats model does that. So like you say, you get some extra nice features, the additional polish, but you're paying a lot more. So there's no one right answer or wrong answer. It just depends on what you're looking for, how much you're willing to spend. But on the other hand, you do get a lot of the other features that you get with the AirPods work just as well with the Beats. So it's something you can think about.
Well, if you're in the market for the AirPods Max or even the Beats Studio Pro, you might want to wait a few days because you could purchase it tax-free. That's a little bit of a stretch here, but Apple has done this in the past. Yeah, Apple has done this in the past, and I don't know if they do it every single year. Typically, I see this around the beginning of the school year, right? So when most families are in the market for purchasing Apple computers or other technology for the school, Apple will work. I mean, it's not just Apple. It actually is from the states themselves, right? It's from the states. The states have these tax-free days, and it really goes for anything else, right? Pencils and whatever else that you might need for school. But obviously, more and more, it's more on the technology side. So this is a good article that you linked to that kind of rounds up. There are 6 states so far that have at least announced it. That for like the next, I think it's over the next week or so, maybe even into the first week or so of August.
Exactly.
You can go and purchase a variety of school supplies, including some Apple products without tax on top of it.
Exactly. In different states, there are different things that you can get. In some places, it's just a laptop computer. And in some places, it's a little bit broader than it might include an iPhone or an iPad or certain types of iPads. But, if you're in the market to get something for back to school anyway, which so many people are, and if you live in one of these states, why not, delay your purchase a week or two and maybe save yourself some state sales tax and make it a little bit more affordable. You either save the money or use, the saving, like that extra $100 or $200 that you save on tax or whatever, maybe put that towards getting like a little bit more storage, a little bit bigger SSD, something like that. So just something to think about.
Yeah, and by the way, he does a good job in here. Who is this? Wesley Hillier does a good job in saying this is separate than the Apple back to school promotion. Every year,
right? Apple that's what they control. Exactly.
Yeah. Apple has some kind of a little deal. Typically, we've seen it to where you buy a MacBook Pro and you get a free, set of AirPods, not Pro, but AirPods. Or more recently, I've seen it that you buy an iPad or a Mac and you can get like $100 Apple gift card, right?
Gift card,
right? Apply, right, and it gets you a little bit off on there. So that's Apple's back to school promotion. But as he says in this article, you can use that in conjunction with potentially the tax-free. But you're right. Now that I see it here, each state has their own limitations on here. Like the total sale price of all exempt items cannot exceed $750 if you're in Alabama. The total price can't exceed $1,500 if you're in Florida. So anyway, just do a little Googling around and make sure. But yeah, if you're going to purchase something, certainly for the kid or even for yourself as, back to school aspects, be sure and keep track of the tax-free options there. Time for our Where Ya At segment.
Where Ya At?
Good one today. It seems like they're all good. It just almost seems like they're getting better and better from the stories aspect on there, Jeff, which I just think is so funny. This one was from Danny Orleans. I guess it's Orleans, right? On there. Danny Orleans is a magician. I think he's based out of Chicago, right? He was flying to Newark because he was going in to do a magician's magic show for a trade show. And he got to Newark, and United Airlines told them that all of his equipment or his sound equipment wasn't wasn't there. It wasn't going to be available, which is devastating, right? Because this is his show. He's got to go and do. Well, the AirTags came to his rescue. You take over the story, Jeff.
They told him that your bags didn't even make it here. And then he looked at his AirTag and looked at, his location, and finally he's like, yeah, they did make it here. I can see that they're right here at the airport. And so he went to the luggage place and tried to get help. And they said, we can't do anything to help you. They said, we'll find it and ship it to you. Yeah, he showed him here. It's like, we're going to get it. We'll get it to you in the next 4 or 5 days. He's like, my show's in 2 days. I can't wait 4 or 5 days. I'll be home in 4 or 5 days. This is ridiculous. But because of the AirTag, he could not just that he could see it was at the airport. He could actually see it looks like it's right outside this Terminal 90. And so, but the problem is he's already in the baggage claim part. He can't get to Terminal 90. So the funny part was he went and bought himself a ticket. He picked a random city, Boston, and it was a refundable ticket so that he could turn it back in. But he bought a ticket just so that he could get through security, go to the gate, go to Terminal 90, look out the window, and sure enough, and the funniest thing, the picture tells 1,000 words here. The funniest thing is the picture where he's like, there is my bag. And so he's walking around the airport trying to find all these United people saying, look, you see that bag out there? That's my bag. And he's funny because he's like, all these airport workers are just walking by the bag. It's in the middle of a tarmac, like where planes would be going back and forth. And people are just ignoring it, just assuming, whatever, bag in the middle of the tarmac, who cares? And so he finally was able to find somebody that when when you actually look out the window, see that bag,
it's right there.
And of course they wouldn't let him go out there because of security and stuff. But they had to send a United person out there to then bring it to baggage claim. But again, it's a funny story. But the fact that it was for a magician whose bag disappeared just makes it even more humorous.
Exactly.
But I tell you what, if you're traveling with something that matters to you, stick a $20, $25 AirTag in there because most bags don't get lost, but sometimes they do. And he would have been completely without a solution if it wasn't for that little $20 AirTag. And then thanks to the AirTag, he was able to get his bag and do his show. So, how can you not put an AirTag in a bag when you're traveling? Whether you're traveling internationally or across wherever you're traveling, you need your bag. That's why you brought your bag, because you need your bag.
That's it, Jeff. He would have been completely helpless because I've done this before. You go down to baggage claim. Everybody else is waiting there. Everybody else has to wait in line to get to the person to say, hey, my bag isn't here, and you got to fill out the claim and everything. And then they will typically say, we'll find the bag and we'll send it to your home address or your office address, whatever it is. It'll be 4 to 5 business days, whatever. And then what do you do at that point? You're like, okay, I guess I got nothing else to do, right? And so that you go on with your life hoping and praying that the bag is going to show up at some point. But no. When you have the AirTag, you can actually spot it. And I have done this. I don't usually check bags anymore, mainly because I know this is how the airlines are today. But when I do, I make sure. That was even the travel blogs that I follow. I just mentioned that earlier. All of them are saying this is probably the #1 travel accessory you should be investing in today. Truly. And not just because of the humorous stories that we sometimes share, but even if you're traveling somewhere, I have one for all of my bags, whether it's my briefcase or my rolling bag or even, my wife's purse. Like I put them everywhere just simply because at some point it's going to be good to find it. And when you need it, you need it. And that's it. Like, good on Danny for at least going through and pushing this a little bit, because he could have just turned around and been like, okay, I guess I got nothing. I got to cancel my gig or whatever. But no, he pushed it. And like you said, he even had to buy a ticket to get back into the terminal. And the picture is right there. You can see it just sitting there with nothing else around. It's almost like it fell off the little trolley or something.
It must have fallen off the truck. Like yeah, it's crazy.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
And it looks like it's a Pelican case because it's his sound equipment and stuff. Anyway, we could just go on and on. But yeah, just getting the AirTags and putting them in. And by the way, I just ordered another little set of my CR2032 or 2023 batteries, Jeff. I just like to make sure I have enough of those, on hand because we talked about this before. They do not have the bitterant coating on there, but just making sure that you have a good supply of those little batteries, not a ton, but I just want to make sure that I replace them enough, because I use them in other things as well. But that's what those little AirTags use, are those little tiny batteries on there. So make sure you have some of those on there as well. And then lastly, we'll just throw this into where here segment. I saw this movie
it fits,
yesterday.
yeah.
And I thought, I knew you were going to link to it. This is great. So we've talked about the underdogs before. I think this is the third video in this series. Maybe it's the fourth or something. But this is 4 people that Apple has these cute little mini movies on about, they're trying to get, I think it was a pizza box that they were developing or something.
That was the first one, years ago.
That was the first
2019.
one. And so now they're going to a meeting. But this was interesting because in a very humorous manner, it highlights the security aspects of the Find My service with Apple.
Yeah, I don't want to give away the plot, although frankly, you can't really give it away because it's more silliness than anything else. But suffice it to say that somebody's laptop is stolen and they chase after it thanks to the built-in features that you can find. Now, my first thought when I saw this video was to cringe because we all know what I'm going to say. You really should not chase the bad guys yourself. You should involve the police or the law enforcement. Having said that, I also know that depending upon where you are, your stolen bag or stolen laptop might be, item 100 on the list of police priorities. So they may not be willing to drop everything and join you in a chase. Whereas perhaps I understand the desire to just go find it yourself. So be careful out there if you're in a situation like this for real. But putting aside, the reality of the situation, it's a funny little movie. It's a very funny little movie where they are chasing the dim-witted bad guys to try to find the laptop. So it does. It also, the movie, in addition to showing the Find My stuff, the movie does a good job of pointing out some Apple security features, how you can remotely lock things if something's lost, which applies whether you have an iPhone or an iPad or a computer, what you have. So it's a cute little movie. It's worth watching.
It also highlights the dangers of clicking on links in emails.
Yes, it does.
You have to watch until the very, very end, and after the credits even, which I love. At the credits, I thought at the end, just real quick, it says, starring, and it has all the list of the Apple products. It's it has the actors in there, but it's all the Apple products that they feature in there as well, which I thought was really cute. So we'll link to that. In the know. Here is my tip today. Unfortunately, I had to fly down quickly to Texas for my mother's health, but I was able to come back. Everything's fine now. But it reminded me of something that is sort of a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I think most people know this, but I'm just going to highlight it again. When I fly into an airport like in Houston, the George Bush Intercontinental, or another airport that is notorious for this, I've seen, is like Orlando. Or my wife recently had to fly over to the Denver airport. When you get a rental car from these airports, Jeff, for whatever reason, and I think I know the reason, you are almost immediately shuffled onto a very beautiful roadway or a highway that just happens to be a toll road. It's very difficult to avoid the toll roads at some of these airports. Now, I know why some of these places do this, because it is very lucrative, I can imagine. And especially from the rental car agencies, because many times people don't even think about the tolls. But of course, the rental car agency has already taken care of you, right? They have built in a toll tapper for you. And, just to charge an extra additional fee for that convenience for you, they're going to just, it's like 2 or 3 times the charge of the actual toll. You can tell I'm a little bit bitter about this because I've been burned a couple of times. So here's the way I get around this. When I flew into Houston this past week, I got a rental car, and sure enough, the quickest way, the easiest way to get where I needed to go was full of toll roads. And of course, the rental agency had a beautiful big tag, on there, and they're like, hey, do you want to have the tolls? I'm like, you know what? I'm okay. So as soon as I got the car and I start exiting out of the garage area, I that I prefer Google Maps still, although I flip back and forth sometimes now. But on both Google Maps and Apple Maps, when you say, show me directions to this location, you have the option of avoiding toll roads. Now, very simple. It seems like most people know this, but I got to tell you, number one, Google Maps that I use, it seems to me it's a little bit hidden. I have to do 2 or 3 additional taps to get there, because it's only after I say show directions, and then there's it has the directions and it shows the quickest way to get there and the most fuel efficient method to get there. But in the top right corner, there's 3 little dots. And if you tap on those 3 little dots, then you have to tap on options for your trip. And then you can toggle on avoid tolls. Now, Apple Maps, to their credit, It is right there on the front screen. In fact, if you say, I want to drive here, and then there's a little drop down that says avoid tolls, or you can even say avoid highways. I don't normally avoid highways. I like the highways, but I avoid tolls if you don't want to take the back roads. Now, the only thing quickly on this is if you do this, you are probably going to be going through some let's say more interesting parts of town. So you just want to make sure you are following the maps appropriately on where you go. Watch for the turns and everything, because you don't want to end up in a weird part of town sometimes. And I've done that before. So I just kind of watch it, and I always make sure that I have CarPlay and everything set up before I leave the rental car garage, just because I want to be comfortable with all of that. Now, the last thing quickly I'll say on this is that if you want to do this all the time, which I don't. There are times when I don't mind paying tolls. Typically, it's with my own car and my own tag, that I want to use. But I don't avoid it all the time. But if you do want to avoid toll roads all the time, you can go into settings on the iPhone, into the regular settings, and then you'll see a maps option, and then you can go into driving and you can toggle on avoid tolls for all of the directions. Now, you still have the option to turn that off in the individual map app itself, so you can do that. And then in a similar vein, if you go to Google Maps, you have to dig into your Google account settings for Google Maps, but you can toggle that on as similarly as well. Like you have to go into the Google app and do that, to where you can just say, all of my driving directions, I want to avoid toll roads all the time. Last thing here is, make sure you turn it back off. If you want, like me, I have to remember, okay, I got to turn that on or I got to turn that off. Fortunately, both Apple Maps and Google Maps will tell you if you have a toll charge on a particular route that you're going to go. So now, that helps remind me that I got to turn this off or on. So anyway, that's avoiding tolls in both Google Maps and Apple Maps.
Yeah, that's a good tip. And remember that you can, hopefully you're not doing this while you're driving, but, as you're quickly planning a trip, you can toggle it on and off to take a look at it. So you can say, okay, if I avoid the tolls, how much longer will the trip be, if any? Right. What you can see what roads you're going to be taking. Not that you necessarily know the roads in its new city, but at least you can get a sense of what they're looking like on a map and stuff. So that's nice. You can take a look at that. That's a good tip.
Yeah, that's
good.
It's
a good
Yeah, I don't usually find that it takes that much longer, but you're absolutely right, Jeff. And again, that's a great point that you're making, because again, you're going through more interesting, some would say maybe more seedy parts of the cities in which you're in. So again, just be very aware of the area, and be aware of where you're going, because a lot of times it is going to be more stoplights, it's going to be more turns, that kind of a thing, because that's what the tolls allow you to do, right? And that's how they sell it, is the fact that it's going to be streamlined on there. And I get that, and sometimes I'll do it, but if you are like me and sometimes you want to avoid it, this is the way to do it.
Yeah. My tip is related to this, which is traveling in the future. Woo, sounds exciting. No, it's not quite as exciting. It's very related because it's in the same place. So in Apple Maps, for example, as you were describing, Brett, when you tap a destination and then click on the button for directions, you just scroll down a little bit and you will see an option there of, toggling on and off to avoid tolls. In that same area, you will also see an option for, am I leaving now, or do I want to change the time that I'm leaving? Because sometimes you might be planning a trip at night when there's nobody on the road, but you actually might be driving like during rush hour. And so during rush hour, something that looks like a 20-minute drive may actually be like a 45 minutes or an hour drive. And so if you turn this option on, you can tell Apple, I want you to tell me what is the best route and how long can I expect this route to take me at 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, as opposed to, 10 o'clock on Tuesday night when I'm thinking about a trip. And Apple does a really good job of this. I mean, one of the things, and I'm sure Google does too, but because there are just so many iPhones out there, and Apple is seeing, how long it takes for actual trips to take place. They know, of the thousands and thousands of people that have done this similar route on a Thursday at 4 o'clock, this is how long it typically takes those iPhones that are inside of cars to go that route. It can do a pretty good job. And so when you're trying to prepare for directions, you can say, if I'm going to do this at such and such a time and such a day in the future, what are the best options? How long is it going to take? The route that it recommends will change based upon the time of day, because sometimes a day, maybe the interstate's going to be much slower that time of day during rush hour. So it may make more sense to take an alternative route. Whereas on the other hand, if you're traveling, at a different time of day, the interstate's going to be so wide and clear that it's definitely the way that you want to go. So it's nice to have this option. I mean, so many times we're looking at Apple Maps, not because we're traveling someplace right now, but instead because we're going to travel in the future. And so this is a great option to toggle on and take a look at if you're trying to plan a trip, especially like what you described, Brett. If you're planning a trip in a city that you don't know as well, you're traveling there,
right?
And you don't know what it's like around the airport. So it's a cool little feature.
That is something I had no idea was in there. And it's funny because that button is right there. Like you said,
right there.
It says now, as is, because theoretically they think you want to leave now. But if you tap it, then you have the ability to pick a day and time, just like you said.
Very cool little feature.
And you can even say, I want to leave at this time, or I want to arrive by this time. I will use that for sure. That's a really neat tip. Wow, this is like the map app tip today. That's really good. Woo. Okay, I think we covered everything. A fun show today. Thanks, Jeff. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking more about iOS 17, and we'll see more people talking about that. I'll see if next week I have A, the public beta of iOS 17, and B, a new stand for my iPhone. We'll wait and see. Let us know, folks. All right, thanks, Jeff. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.